Welcome, everybody, to episode 47. Yeah, I think, because last week was 46. That would make this 47 of Transcending Humanity. My name is Vanessa Joy, aka Vanessa, and I am joined today by the amazing Sarah Wayte, and we will get into Sarah in a second here. First, I want to remind everybody that whole Patreon thing where you send me money and it helps me make this show. Be awesome if more people did that. And, thanks to the people that are already, and more people, the merrier, because podcasting is surprisingly expensive. And also don't forget, we have the merch store. I received in one of our new items a little mug that says Conservative Tears, which is very fitting for the show, especially since a certain someone got missed by an inch a couple days ago. So anyways, welcome back to the show. My guest today is Sarah Wayte. Sarah, what are your pronouns?
She, her.
She, her. Okay.
Yeah.
I see it on your thing, but I like to just push that forward. So I'm currently live streaming this episode just to see how it works, because I am hoping to do episode 50 as a live stream. And I'm looking at the Instagram feed. If anyone is watching this on Instagram, it probably looks really bad. It even says audio. Oh, holy crap. So I'm sorry. I don't know why it's doing that. So, did I disappear for a second? Okay. And then YouTube is also live streaming and absolutely no one's watching it. So, okay. Sarah.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about you.
Oh my gosh, the unending question. I am Sarah, and I am, as you can hear, I am an English woman who now lives in Canada. What to say? I always struggle with these things. I am a copywriter and a brand photographer. These are the things that I do for my work, and I am a very creative person. I'm writing a novel. I also co-host a podcast. I recently, I say 2 years now, it's been discovered that I have ADHD. I was diagnosed at the age of 42, which was quite a shock. And I come off the back of having a 20-year career as a paramedic in the UK before I moved to Canada and decided I wasn't doing that anymore, and seeking a creative life instead. So yes, that's me.
Well, that's fun. It's kind of funny. Episode 44 was a brand photographer. Episode 45 was a copywriter. And so now we have a brand photographer / copywriter. I too was recently diagnosed as neurodivergent. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about this episode, is the joys of being neurodivergent and being late diagnosed. I was 42 when I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, PTSD. The laundry list just continues to go as it does. And I don't know about you, but once I was finally diagnosed, it really answered a whole lot of questions and made a whole lot of things from the past make sense.
Yep, 100%, definitely. There was a lot of moments after I was diagnosed, and started to do some reading up and learning and speaking to some of my friends who'd also been late diagnosed. And yeah, there was definitely a whole, okay, it's not me. I'm not a terrible human being, and my brain's not broken. And it was certainly a big reveal.
Oh yes. Yeah, it's in my case, I had started following some autistic and neurodiverse kind of influencers on Facebook and Instagram and things like that. And it started whoa, this is all making a whole lot of sense and explaining a lot of things. And I did the self-tests, and the self-tests are like, holy shit, you're autistic. And yeah, you just kind of go from there. So, But you being a paramedic for 20 years in the UK while being ADHD, that's why we have you here today, to talk stories, because I want to hear all about your experiences and the madness and your work trying to balance neurodiversity and such an intense position. How did you get into paramedics in the first place?
Well, this is the funny and interesting thing. I became a paramedic by accident, is what I always tell people. It was never in my plan at all. My husband is also a paramedic, and for him, it was a lifelong vocation. He'd, at the age of 4, decided he was going to be a paramedic. That's what he wanted to do. I had no such aspirations whatsoever. I was 19. I'd just moved back to England from the tiny island of Malta, where my mum is from, and we'd lived there for my teenage years. And all I knew was I did not want to go back to Malta. It was too small a place. I wanted to be back living in England and being independent. And I needed a job. So I saw an advert in the paper, I think it was, it was for taking emergency calls, actually. So I started off on the phone lines. And it was just, I saw this ad in the paper and thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I can do that until I figure out what I want to do when I grow up. So I joined the ambulance service and got trained to take the calls. I did that for about 6 months and then very quickly progressed up to dispatching ambulances, which I actually ended up doing for the next 6 or 7 years. Really sort of high stress environment, being in a very busy control center with if you can kind of picture, I don't know whether you're into Star Trek, but with all the screens around, it was kind of like that. There were screens everywhere, and you're obviously managing ambulances driving all over the place and, going to calls and stuff. So there was that kind of environment for 7 years, I think it was. And I reached a point where I now looking back, I realize it was burnout. I was done. I'd been in there for so long. And I said to myself, at that point, I was with my not quite then husband. It was my boyfriend back then, and he was training to be a paramedic already. And he said, "Why don't you try being a paramedic?" And I thought, well, it's either that or I go and work in a grocery store, one or the other. So I might as well just apply and see what happens. And yeah, they accepted me. They took me in, and the next thing I knew, I was training to be a paramedic. So it was kind of, I always say it was an accident. Really, it was never a plan.
You just fell into it.
Yep. Which I think is like an ADHD
I can't even
way,
imagine. Right? Yeah, pretty much. We just kind of just do things like my background. I ran a manufacturing company for years, and I left that and pivoted. Now I'm a real estate photographer because it makes total sense if you're ADHD. Cool. So
let's face it, we're all going to face loss one day, be it a loved one, a job, a pet, a home, or a sense of self and security, or my keys. Again. But grief is going to hit us all someday. Hi, welcome to Good Grief, a podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief and loss with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. On this podcast, we will get down and dirty with all things grief-related and hopefully learn a thing or two about living with loss and coping with grief and the grieving. You might laugh, you might cry, but hopefully you'll just feel a little less alone. Tune in each week to learn all about grief, meet some special guests, and learn that grief doesn't always have to suck.
ADHD. So, for people that are neurotypical, though, I imagine most of our listeners to this show are neurodiverse. But when you have neurodivergence, there's, I would say, kind of a common theme with it is having stimuli thrown at you, and you have no idea what to do with them sometimes. How did you cope with the absolute madness of being in dispatch? You said that you got burned out. I can't believe you lasted that long. I would have lasted 60 seconds, not 6 or 7 years. what did you do to try to just keep yourself sane through all that?
Yeah, oh, that's a really good question, actually. I think a lot of it, I mean, in a word, I managed it terribly is probably is the best way to explain it. But I say to people, once I became a
Fair.
paramedic once I became a paramedic and was out on the road, I say to people that working in the control room, I was just a very angry person for 8 years. And I'm not an angry person, but that place made me very, very angry all the time. I was carrying a lot of emotional weight and like struggling in there just because of the environment that it was. But I also really, what this is the thing I discovered after leaving the ambulance service, that actually people with ADHD manage emergency situations really well, and obviously can multitask really well, which probably explains how I managed to stay there for so long. And I also loved what I did. I loved that I could help people. I loved the team of people that I was working with. I also really liked the shift work. Not having to do Monday to Friday 9 to 5 was a big bonus for me, and having a week off every 4 weeks because of the way our shifts worked and stuff like that, just it suited me at the time. I was very much a night owl, and it just kind of worked really nicely. So there were elements to it that kept me there because they obviously appealed to what I now realise, the ADHD part of myself. But yes, it was hard, definitely. And once I got out and started training as a paramedic, once I was out in just being outside and actually managing myself a bit more and not being in this environment, because it was a very stressful environment to be in. It had the way I kind of described it was being in the dispatch centre was mentally exhausting. Being out on the road as a paramedic at the time was physically exhausting. Actually, it turns out the mental exhaustion came later. It just took a lot longer to kick in. But initially it was like a breath of fresh air going out and working on an ambulance instead of being in the control room all the time. So
I can imagine, because it allows you can actually focus on something, be it whatever you're doing, without having the constant everything going on around you. Like if you're just driving, or if you're like picking up patients and stuff like that, you can at least laser focus in on what you're doing.
yes.
How many people on a team did you usually work with?
On the ambulance or in the control room?
On the ambulance.
On the ambulance, it would be me and one other person usually. But I also did quite a long part of my career as a paramedic was working by myself, just working on a response car. So you were your own boss basically all day. So
I can imagine that had to be pretty intense. So
it had its moments.
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
There was like there were a lot of highs and lows, I would say. There were days when I would come home and say, that was amazing, we saved a life today, it was a really good feeling. The dopamine kick, when you got it, was really intense because it would be very high stress situations. And then there would be times when you wouldn't save a life for a very, very long time. You'd just be dealing with the run of the mill stuff, so picking up people off of the floor and brushing them down and just dealing with very sort of basic needs for people. We did a lot of social aspect work because that's just the way the emergency services are in the UK. They're very sort of pushed to have to deal with everything, lots of mental health and lots of social issues and all of that kind of thing. So
the same way.
Yeah, there was definitely that element to it. And then there were the days when I would come home and cry and not want to go back to work the next day.
Okay, so that's so I can track this later. So yeah, that live streaming thing does not work. I'm just going to turn that off. Anyways, okay. So sorry about that.
That's okay. Did you get all of that? I don't know whether
it was
I
good
carried on talking.
It was good to test it out. Yeah. Okay. Go away, window. There we go. Okay. So back to it. So you went from dispatch to paramedic to copywriting and brand photography.
Yes.
So
natural progression, right?
Yeah. How did that pivot work?
Yeah. Okay. So bit of backstory. I always say to people, I was always a writer before I ever became a paramedic, before I joined the ambulance service. When I left home at 19, I had aspirations of being a screenwriter and a novelist and, you know, all of these wonderful things. But I was living on my own in a country where I didn't have any family, and it was, you need to pay some bills was the kind of the general consensus. So I did some temping work first before I found the ambulance service. But once I joined the ambulance service, it basically knocked any ability out of me to write. And I always say to people that I basically had a 10-year writer's block from that point. And I think it was just like dealing with the emotional capacity to do that job. But I think it was probably a good few years in, I realized I knew inherently that I was creative and I needed some sort of creative outlet. And if I couldn't write, I needed to find something else. And along the way, I found photography. There's the whole meandering pathway of how I came to photography, but basically I came to photography. And training as a paramedic, we had some people on my paramedic course who were getting married, and they said, would you photograph our wedding? And I was like, hell no, I'm not going to do that. But they twisted my arm and persuaded me to do it. And I went and shot their wedding and fell in love with wedding photography immediately. So promptly set up a wedding and portrait photography business while still training as a paramedic. And it was that running the photography business brought me back round to writing, because I had to write my website, I had to write blog posts, and this is pre-social media, but, you know, later on social media stuff came in as well. So the writing kind of found me again. It came back, and I started doing the writing again. And just to kind of throw things into the mix a little bit, I was feeling pretty miserable with the whole paramedic thing at this point. We're talking a few years later, and my friend said to me, what would you do, you know, if money and time and everything wasn't you know, in your way, what would you do? And I said, I really want to get a degree. And she went, okay, why don't you have a look at that? So I found an online degree in creative writing, which I signed up for and started a week later, because, you know, why prepare yourself for these things? Just kind of throw yourself into them. So I was doing a creative writing degree. I was working as a paramedic. I was running a wedding and portrait photography business. And then my husband said, well, why don't we move? Well, actually, I said, why don't we move to Canada? And so that started happening as well. So I had all of this stuff going on all at the same time. And how I didn't fall over, I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of like how I came round to the writing and the photography, basically. When we moved to Canada, I knew I didn't want to do the ambulance service anymore. I was in a really bad place with the ambulance service mentally at that point. I knew I was ready to leave it behind. I felt like I'd done my time. So we came to Canada, and I said, I'm going to try and work for myself. I'm going to try and see how I go with setting up a business, writing. Well, actually, mainly I was going to be a photographer some photographer friends had just started asking me to like write some blogs for them. So I thought, okay, I'll be a photographer and I'll do a little bit of blogging for people. And in the first year that I was here, it very quickly became apparent that actually, no, I was going to be a writer and just do a little bit of photography. And then, of course, you know, 2020 happened, which I don't think I need to go into in too much depth, because I think we can all remember that massive trauma. And so wedding photography went out the window.
That was a thing that happened.
Yes, it was definitely a thing. And yeah, that was a good opportunity for me to say goodbye to weddings. And I still wanted to photograph people, because I like having people in front of my camera. So I felt like the brand photography really fit in with the copywriting, really. So yeah, very long, convoluted story. There are no short stories.
Oh, definitely.
In my world.
They're hand in hand.
So.
There's no short stories with anybody that's neurodiverse. We just true. Because we talk about something and then something else pops up that other people are like, where did that come from? And we're like, isn't that how everybody thinks? And they're like, no. And we're like, well, that's not very fun for you. So,
it's true.
Wedding photography terrifies me. Like, I've had some people ask me, but I mean, with different photography, there's different skill sets behind different kinds of photography. Like, my specialty right now is real estate photography, because that's what I've been doing for a while. And a portrait photographer isn't necessarily going to be a good real estate photographer, because it takes a whole different set of skills.
Completely.
And so I'm trying to expand my skill set, but events terrify me. The fact that you dove into that, like, head first, girl, that's shit. Getting heart palpitations just thinking about it.
How I do everything in life is just to throw myself in there and see what happens. But I've always said I fly by the seat of my pants, basically. This is what I've done my entire life. So
you legend. So why Canada? I mean, I would like to live in Canada, but what made you decide to pop over there across the pond?
Oh my goodness. This sounds very specific, but we had, I don't know if you knew, in the UK in 2016, we had a referendum to decide whether we were going to stay or leave Europe, the Brexit referendum, as it became known.
Brexit.
That's the one, yes. And the day was 24th of June, 2016, which this has nothing to do with my memory, because as someone with ADHD, I have a terrible memory, but it was my husband's birthday. That's the only reason I remember this date so very, very clearly. We got the results that the UK had decided to leave Europe, and I promptly cried, because for me, it was really important to still be part of Europe, because my family all lived in Europe, and I wanted to be able to have ease of movement to be able to go and see them that we'd always had. So I was really upset by it. I cried, and excuse my potty mouth, but I turned around to my husband and went, fuck it, let's move to Canada. To which he responded, okay then. We'd never visited Canada before.
Of course, right after you said potty mouth, your recording just went out. Your audio went out. So
oh my goodness,
can you repeat after refuse my potty? I heard refuse my potty, excuse my potty mouth, and then after that, hopefully it recorded on your end, but I didn't hear it. So
that's fine. I shall repeat. So I said, and excuse my potty mouth, fuck it, let's move to Canada. That's what I said, and my husband said, okay then, because he goes along with my crazy ideas. Bless him. Somehow he seems to just run with these things. And actually, if it hadn't have been for him, we wouldn't have got visas to move to Canada. So I'm very grateful that he did that. But neither one of us had ever visited Canada. We'd never been here before. We just kind of knew that it was a place that didn't really appear in the news that often. And for us, that felt like a good thing. That felt like if it's not being talked about all the time, then it must be okay. And, I know it has its problems like any other country, but it just felt like peace and quiet. And we knew it was big, and we knew we could probably get a nice distance away and maybe have some beautiful views, and which is why we looked at BC, because mountains and they're spectacular. So it was a case of, we were just like, we'll book a trip to Vancouver and see what we think for like 2 weeks. So we came and visited, fell in love on day one with the place. And as soon as we got back to the UK, we started applying for visas, and we were here just over a year later. So
I love Canada, especially where you are. The Pacific Northwest is where I know I belong. I want to wind up out there sometime. Depending on what happens with the US, it might have to be in Canada, which I wouldn't be opposed to. But I also know Canada is also teetering on falling conservative as well. So
that is
which
a worry.
Is bad
That's
for me
actually,
being trans.
Yeah, that's actually why my husband and I have made the decision to actually start applying for citizenship now, because that's important to us, that we get the opportunity to at least try and vote. And yeah, that is a slight worry. That is something we are worried about here too, actually.
Yeah. Because, we all need someplace to go, and you're in a beautiful place with nice enough people and wonderful surroundings. So, and it's probably a lot less chaotic than the UK as well. So,
much less, definitely. Yeah, the space to breathe is just unbelievable. We traveled to Nova Scotia last year, which is right over on the opposite coast. And I was absolutely astounded at the fact that we took 2 planes. It took all day to travel, and we never even left the country. That was amazing to me, for someone who's been living on islands her entire life and just has to drive a little while and she finds the sea, kind of thing. That was a big shock to me, how big this country is.
North America is a very wide continent. So for those unfamiliar with geography, she's in BC, British Columbia, which look at Washington State and look north. There you go. Nova Scotia is the far east coast. It's even further east than Maine, I believe.
It is.
Go a little further, you're in Greenland.
Yep.
So, yeah, that was a big trip. But Canada, like, there's so many different places and there's so much variety of scenery. Why don't I live there? Prime Minister Trudeau, if you're listening to this, could you give your girl some free citizenship so I can get the fuck out of America? That would be nice. Thank you. Bye.
It's so funny how I've got friends in the US who've all said the same thing in the last week. They've all been like, if it really goes bad, can I just drive north and you'll come and find me? I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Come over here and just stay with us. So
I am terrified for what's going to happen in November. My hopes are bolstered by what just happened in the UK and what happened in France.
yes.
I know in France, it only, the Conservatives only really lost because a bunch of the other, like, 'cause they have tons of parties, and a bunch of the other ones dropped out in order to cause less competition. But here, there's just, it's rough. And I'm not confident that Biden has the chops to beat Trump this round.
Yeah.
Which is hard. So, especially now that Trump has been kind of martyred due to getting his ear clipped. So, yeah, that's a whole other story. But Canada, it sounds very appealing. I would love to move to Iceland, but they don't allow Americans to live there unless they're independently wealthy, which makes sense. I wouldn't want Americans living in my country either. So, like, Norway, maybe. I could do Norway. I've never been there, but so.
Sweden's very nice. I've been to Sweden. It's beautiful.
So your clientele, what kind of people do you work with copywriting and branding and stuff?
So I kind of fell into, again, my niche, as they call it, of working with creative businesses, because that's what I knew. I came from this background of running a photography business, so I already had a huge network of photographers, and I was doing initially I was doing a lot of blogging for them, so it just felt like the right space to be in. And from there I kind of went into working with like coaches and course creators, and from that as well I realized actually the people that I love to work with are the people who have a really strong personal brand. They're the ones that they want to sound like them in their copy. They want to look like themselves in their photographs. You know, they want their personality to come through because that's their main selling point in their business. I get so nerdy on this. It's a whole big thing that I love talking about. But actually, and I guess by definition of working with those kinds of people, it turns out I've kind of learned that a lot of the people I work with are neurodiverse, which makes things great for me and probably actually really helpful for them too. I find a lot of the clients that I work with they're just kind of exploring their neurodiversity at the moment, maybe, or they're just wondering, or they've just been diagnosed, something along those lines, and they've never really worked with someone like myself who has been there and gets it, and gives them all of the different options for us to stay in contact, because not everyone can manage to write answers into a form. Some people prefer to talk to me, so I have ways of collecting like verbal information from them, and just being able to respond to that in a really flexible way. As I've had people come back to me saying, you saw me, and that was really helpful to me to be able to get this job done and not have to try and fit into someone's awkward box of how they run their business. You were really open and flexible and were like, okay, fine, if this isn't working, let's try something else, so so I kind of I think I probably do end up working with a lot more neurodiverse people than I'd ever planned to, because I feel like neurodiverse people, we connect to each other very quickly and easily. I think we see each other, don't we, very, very easily. So
I think we attract each other
yes,
like bugs to a light, really. So,
exactly.
because most everybody I'm friends with is neurodiverse one way or another. So, and being in the trans community, it's very common in the trans community. So
Okay.
it's just all sorts of fun there.
Yeah.
So let's bounce back to the 2-year experiences in the UK. What is the absolute batshit craziest thing that ever happened to you as a paramedic?
I'm trying to decide which one to tell you. There were plenty of examples. I think
You can
my
tell multiple
favorite.
if you want.
Okay, I think my favorite example, because it's also a happy story, and I don't want to depress anybody with all the other kind of stories, but actually, there are two very similar. I once delivered a baby in the front seat of a car in a McDonald's car park. And the other one was I delivered the first of twins in an elevator as we were going up to the maternity unit, but we didn't quite make it, unfortunately. So this, I
Oh
always tell
my.
the stories. Yes, this is someone as well who does not have children of her own, never wants children of her own, and the delivering babies was like one of the most terrifying things that could possibly happen to a paramedic, as far as I was concerned. So yes, these were fun experiences, but
Yeah.
babies basically deliver themselves anyway, and it's going to happen whether you want it to happen or not. But the
Yeah,
baby in
they're
the
coming. So,
they're coming. The baby in the elevator definitely taught me that. The mum was, I think she was like 2 months premature. She was waiting for a C-section, and she went into labour, and
oh wow.
she lived quite a long way from the hospital as well, so we had quite a long way to journey in. And I remember saying to her, look, do not push, whatever happens, do not push, which it's impossible to tell a woman not to push when she's trying to have a baby, apparently. I have no idea, I've got no frame of reference, but
Yeah.
we arrived at the hospital just as she said to me, I think the head is out. And I was like, no, it can't be. It's not happening just yet. So we ran inside with her and got her into the elevator. And as the doors closed, I thought I'd better take a look. And I lifted the blanket up, and yes, there was a baby crowning, ready to come out. I had just enough time to put my hands out and catch the baby as it flew out between mum's legs. And we finished up with me holding baby and the elevator doors pinging open at the maternity unit, with this elderly couple stood there looking absolutely horrified at the scene in front of them. So, yeah,
It had
that
to
was
be
a
like
very
out of a movie.
it was kind of like that, definitely. I don't think you can make stuff up like that happens. It was just one of those crazy moments. And it was, luckily baby was absolutely fine. We rushed them in. Second baby was born like 3 minutes later, and all was good. Everyone was happy. So that's why I like to tell that story. But that's probably one of my craziest ones.
That had to be pretty intense. I can't even imagine. Like, I'm a mother. I didn't give birth because trans, obviously. But the whole birthing process is just kind of absolutely wild. And here in the US, it's stupidly expensive too. But it's both gross and amazing at the same time. And yeah, these things come out, they're like these little purple aliens. And I don't know how people do it. So I really don't.
I'm in
Anyone in the
all
medical field, I don't know how they do it.
Oh gosh, yeah. No, they give, like I say, childbirth was definitely not a paramedic's favourite thing because of all the things that could potentially go wrong. When most births do just kind of happen by themselves, and those ones were great. We all had happy stories that we could share about those, but there were also the very many that did go wrong, and those were the ones that we were most terrified about, because there wasn't really anything we could do. And we weren't midwives.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know how to handle those situations, and we weren't really trained for those situations. So yeah, you just kind of prayed that it would never happen to you, basically. So.
Yeah, there's not the training. You don't have the equipment. If you're actually on the road, like, what the fuck do you do? I've been in the back of an ambulance, and they are pretty rowdy. You're just sitting there bouncing all over the place. And I can't even imagine. I mean, I imagine it would shake a baby out half the time, but.
Well, probably, yeah, absolutely.
What about on the dispatch level? Did you ever have anything like wild and weird happen there?
I mean, there were lots of stories, but a lot of it was being a dispatcher. We were probably more distanced because we had we were talking with the ambulance crews as opposed to the patients, but we would hear their stories through them and kind of almost like live vicariously through them. I think I remember a paramedic calling us and saying, this baby is stuck. This is another baby story. Why am I telling all the baby stories? But this is what it was. This baby is stuck.
This baby's in trouble.
Yeah, and we need help. Where is the midwife? And the midwife was a long, long way away from them. So we had to speak to them over the phone and say, right, you need to perform, the midwife wants you to perform an episiotomy, which is where they cut the woman. And the two male paramedics were horrified at the prospect of having to do this to a poor woman who actually probably was like, just do it because it's going to, help. But they did it, and they delivered the baby safely, and the midwife arrived, and they said everyone goes to the hospital, and they took the baby to the hospital. And I remember afterwards calling the crew and saying, are you okay? Because I think neither one of them were parents at that point. I think one of them had a baby on the way, and that was it. They just hadn't ever dealt with that situation before. And the guy I spoke to sounded very shell-shocked. He was like, yeah, I think we're okay, but my crewmate is currently throwing up in the flower bushes across the ways. It was a situation where you just wanted to like hold, give him a big cuddle and everything, because it must have been horrific for them. But they got through it and somehow carried on doing their jobs for the next however many years. So yes, there's a lot of things I think happened in the ambulance service that you kind of just, you put it into a place and then you try not to think about it ever again. It has a real impact. One of the things that I started talking about a lot before I left was how, so many paramedics I knew were struggling with like post-traumatic stress and, mental health issues, but you couldn't ever really talk about it because you were a paramedic and people looked to you to care for everybody else. If the carer is struggling, then what, how is anyone else going to manage, kind of thing. But it was something we saw an awful lot, and it was one of the reasons I knew I had to get out as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't blame you at all. I would have absolutely just lost my mind. I would have shut down on the dispatch or the paramedic level. So I have tons of respect for people that can do that, because I'm just not built that way. So when it comes to copy and photography, what's your bread and butter? What's your favorite thing to do for people?
Websites. I love writing people's websites for them. It's usually because by the time they come around to thinking about hiring a copywriter, they've got a DIY website usually that they've done themselves. And I sort of come in and go, okay, we're going to fix all of this now. This doesn't need to be on this page, and we need to put this over here, and kind of just reimagining even like the path through their website for them, which they didn't really take into consideration before. And I love being able to do that and show them that the just that how different it can be when they stop talking about themselves all the time and actually talk about the kind of clients that they want to work with and what they do and how they help people. That's all of that. By the time we get to the end of it, it's usually a really fun experience of like, oh, that's what a website should look like,
Yeah, like a lot of people are like, well, anyone can make a website. Well, that's not necessarily true. Like even me being pretty creative person, I use a crutch in that I do my websites, the podcast and my photography through Squarespace. Yeah. Because sometimes it's nice to just be able to drag and drop shit on there. But coming in with like actual copy, talking about yourself, it's much better to hire someone to do it for you, because like in your case, like you said, how people communicate to you in different ways. Like some can fill out a form, some have to do it verbally. And so you actually learn about them and learn how they tick, and you can see their business from an outsider's perspective.
Exactly.
It's easy to get lost in the little details of things when you're in the business, and lose interest of anybody that is perusing your page. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, even from the perspective of trying to write my own website, I've done it. It is still very hard. It's so much harder to write about yourself and to sell yourself to other people, I think. But yeah, there's I mean, what was I going to say? There we go. ADHD has just kicked in. The thought that was in my brain has flown away completely. What were we talking about? Oh, what were we talking about? We were talking about websites. That's what. Yes, but just
websites and your own copy.
yes, writing your own copy. It's even from the perspective of being a copywriter, writing your own copy is super difficult. I struggle with it too. I think it's just something very much about the idea of it's even like when you know something in your business, it's so much easier to hear somebody else say it to you. I think that's why we get coaches, why coaches do so well, because we need, when I've worked with other people, worked with a coach, for example, and they've told me something that I've known all along, but for some reason, when someone else says it to you from outside, it just lands differently than it does with yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same with copy. Basically, it's like, I mean, I always sort of say to people, when there's no magic to what I do. I talk to my clients, I ask them a ton of questions. I do things like this where I record what they're saying, and then I go away and I take their words and I put them in their copy, and then they go and read the stuff and they're like, oh, this is really great, where did you get this from? And I'm like, you said it, this is what you said, I'm just giving you your words back to you. And it comes across as being this very magical thing, but it's really not at all. It's fun to be able to show them. They already know their stuff, they just need someone to kind of refine the message for them.
Trust the insights of others,
Yes.
especially someone who is a creative like Sarah, or previous episodes, Jana and Emily, the copywriter I had on a couple episodes ago. Like, she was saying the same thing, that writing copy about yourself is fucking hard. So if you're struggling, don't do it alone. Reach out and touch a copywriter. Or that was
We'll give you some of our copy magic.
Yeah. So, kind of getting close to the end here. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about while we're on the air, or on the recording, or whatever it is?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. We've kind of meandered a little bit around like my world, really. So if you made sense of any of it, well done is what I will say.
If you made sense of our conversation, you're neurodiverse, because we bounced all over the place. It was not linear.
Most probably, yeah, definitely. And also, yeah, I guess maybe the only thing I would really like to add is that, when I first came to the idea that I might be neurodiverse, neurospicy, ADHD, or whatever you want to call the things, there was definitely a sense of, there were lots of feelings. There was abject horror, I think, grief, shock, surprise, and then finally acceptance. Acceptance did come eventually, but I think if you're in that position where you think you might be, I think it's nice to know. I found it really nice to know when I was in that stage that actually it's not the end of the world, and it's, you will figure this out, and it might take a little while and until you find your way. And you're definitely not alone. In fact, there are way more of us now than they ever realized there was before. So, and
don't consider it a weakness either. Neurodiversity in all its myriad forms, it's a superpower. But remember, all superheroes have a weakness. So you have to be able to adapt with that. Like being autistic, I see the world differently from other people. It also means I struggle a lot with a lot of things. So you have to, adapt as you go. And don't be afraid to reach out. And if you feel a certain way, even pop on Reddit, type in how you feel, like what's going on in your brain. Like, does anyone else randomly think of video game soundtracks every time they get in the shower? That happens to me. I guarantee you someone else does. And you can start connecting the dots. You can build a community that way. You can have some fun conversations and just learn a lot about yourself. Most of our listeners are in the US, so actually finding therapy and mental health professionals and stuff like that is out of reach for a lot of people, unfortunately, which is fucking stupid. But if you have any sort of insurance, dive into it to see what you can get covered and just talk to people. Even go to support groups, find some support groups in your area, Google, Facebook, whatever. I'm sure some things will pop up, and you're not alone. Sarah and I, we come from quite literally like half a world apart, and we have a lot of commonalities. The human brain is an absolutely wonderful and horrible thing all at the same time. So, that's definitely a good advice. You're never told to get diagnosed, just like you're never told to come out as anything. And it can provide a lot of answers, but also remember, self-diagnosis is valid. There are many ways to test yourself online. There's a lot of studies that have tests for all sorts of neurodiversity online. And if that helps you just get some answers to explain some things, then do it. Trust me, it's worth it to get that load off your chest and to know that you're not alone. So, well, Sarah, I am so jealous of where you are right now. I wish I could press a transporter and just come and go have a coffee with you rather than sit here in Red, Ohio. But thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Where can people find you?
Oh, okay, yes. So the easiest place is my website is sarahwayte.com. And you can find me I'm mostly on Instagram as Sarah Wayte Creative. So that's probably the easiest place to find me. My VA makes me do reels and things like that, but I like the stories. That's mostly where you'll find me. So
I think Instagram's probably my favorite of the platforms. So I use Facebook the most because that's where I get my clients, but I do wish Instagram moved back towards the photography side of it over the video side, because it's a whole different monster trying to create reels and TikTok. There's a lot of carryover between the two and trying to come up with a hook and all that stuff. So
exactly. Yeah.
So check out Sarah. And do you work with people from anywhere or just locally? Like if a listener wants to hire you to make them a site?
Yeah, I've got clients all over the world. I'm working with someone in Australia at the moment and someone in UK and Europe. As long as it's English speaking, that is the only language I can do. But yes, pretty much anywhere.
Well, that's perfect then. Because, especially if you are neurodiverse and you're looking for someone who kind of gets you, understands how your brain works, because some neurotypical creatives might not understand it. So look up Sarah, and hopefully Sarah will get some business out of this, and hopefully we'll get some patrons out of this. So don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, rate us 5 stars on Apple, on Spotify, whatever. We really need to get that algorithm to keep pushing us up. I am hoping to have this show by year end, at least breaking even, which would be very nice because especially come winter, shit gets expensive for me. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on the show. And next week, I don't know what's going to be happening. I have it scheduled, but I guess I could look it up here so people know what's going to happen next week. Nikki Smith, the Death Doula. I was on her podcast. Comes out on July 17th, which is actually going to be before this airs. So, and this is also a good test for the whole live streaming thing. I don't think it's going to work. So unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to do a live stream episode 50 unless I can find a better way. So, all right. Thank you everyone for joining us. Sarah, thank you for being here, and see you next week.